For those of you listening who are professional brewers, I'm here to tell you that planning brew schedules just got easier. Starting now, Imperial Yeast guarantees that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 3 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. A rad deal from a rad company. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery yet, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. As any brewer is very well aware, there are many strongly held opinions when it comes to the various methods used to make even the simplest of beers, some backed up by empirical evidence, though a good heap originating from nothing more than personal experience. This couldn't be more true in the world of sour beer brewing, which, in addition to being slightly more virgin territory for many, involves the use of multiple organisms that can have an impact on overall predictability. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me to talk about the practice of staggered pitching in mixed fermentation beers is the much smarter than me, Malcolm Fraser.
We've already discussed this. I'm not smarter. I'm just better looking.
Well, I beg to differ. You're both smarter and better looking than me, Malcolm. And you brew a lot more sour beer than I do.
That might be true. So staggered pitching versus combined or co-pitching, as people call it. The reason why this experiment really appealed to me is because I do a lot of sour beer brewing. And I've always taken the lazy way, which is, everyone in the pool and see what will happen.
Right.
But I was interested in trying to isolate a variable that is often talked about on various pages like Milk the Funk and other beer brewing forums. And just when you're talking to home brewers in general, they like the idea of being able to isolate equipment so that their cold side remains clean.
Right.
And they also like the control that may or may not result from these staggered pitches, doing yeast first or doing Brett first and then adding other microbes as you go.
Right.
To hopefully steer the resultant beer. So that was the purpose.
Yeah. I don't, like I said, I don't brew that many sour beers. I think I've made like 6 traditionally fermented sour beers, meaning they weren't quick turnaround or kettle sours. I've done maybe 6 or 7 kettle sour beers. It's just not something that I have the time to do. I've got a Berliner Weiss on tap now. But in my experience, those, when I got started, it was all about just throwing in like a pack of Rosalaire, right? And kind of letting it sit for a year and a half until it turned sour to the desirable level. It wasn't until just, 4 or 5 years ago that I really started hearing people talk about, either pre-fermenting with Saccharomyces and then tossing in your Brett and your bugs and all of that stuff, or doing the opposite, So I think it's an interesting topic, one that that you have tested out, and I'm really stoked to talk about those results. But before we get to the goods, if you're planning on attending this year's BYO boot camp in Asheville, North Carolina, you have less than 1 week from today to save $100 on registration. So if you're on the fence, don't wait much longer. Drew Beecham, Denny Kahn, and I have got some really fun and educational stuff planned for our talk. You're also going to get to go to somebody else's talk as well. In fact, I've been chatting with John Palmer over the last week about some water chemistry experiment findings that we've done that he plans to reference in his presentation. Seriously, I know a ton of people who have attended past boot camps with zero regrets. So come hang out with us for a couple of days in Asheville. It's going to be a blast. Just a couple days ago, John Kimmich from The Alchemist spent an hour answering questions with patrons of Brewlosophy, which, as you might imagine, was super awesome. Coming up next month is someone I've been a fan of for a long time, author of the definitive book on hops, Stan Hieronymus. If the name is unfamiliar, pull your head out from underneath that rock and head over to his blog, AppalachianBeer.com. Check out what he's up to learn more about how you can join in on these killer Q&A sessions and to receive other rewards like unique discounts at Yakima Valley Hops and private Brewlosophy recipes. Head over to patreon.com/Brewlosophy and consider helping us to continue bringing you this show. Huge shout out to our nearly 800 patrons, as well as to all of those who have chosen to use the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when shopping online. We are honestly only able to keep doing this because of you. All right, we've got some feedback, which is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who provide brewers with some of the most beautiful stainless gear out there, such as their new turnkey BH15 pilot system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. On top of the complete brewing systems they sell, Brewers Hardware has a bunch of other unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and home brewers. Go check out everything they have to offer at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Okay, listener Kevin Dufresne from Quebec, Canada, wrote in with a comment on our mash length episode. He says, you talked about mash duration, but I was wondering about the conversion time difference based on mash temperature, because the higher the temperature, the faster the conversion. For example, Beersmith recommends a 75-minute mash for light body, so lower mash temp, a 60-minute mash for medium body or a moderate mash temp, and a 40-minute rest for a heavy body or a high mash temp. When you do an enzyme test with iodine, if the conversion is done, what's the point of continuing mashing? When conversion is done, you don't have any enzymes left to do the converting, so you won't get a higher gravity, whether it's a 30, 60, or 90-minute rest. As you talked about, the only thing I might think is that the longer the mash, the drier the beer. For example, most Kolsch recipes call for a 90-minute mash. So my goal is to maximize conversion and not rush the mash step.
I've always thought this is curious, is because if you like the way your beer is turning out, then keep doing what you're doing. But if you're curious about what's going on, I understand doing an iodine test, because you're like, hey, it's all done. So you try it, and if it ferments out the way you like it, then reduce your mash regimen.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is I think he alluded to the length of time in which enzymes are active or whatever.
Right.
It's not a switch, so they're not all activated and hydrolyzed and put into substrate and then interfacing with starches at the same exact time. So
right.
So that's part of it. Now, like I said, if his system, if he is finding that he's getting a negative iodine test in 30 minutes, then do it for 30 minutes if you like the result in beer. That's just how I think of it.
No, yeah, and you do, and I always appreciate that perspective. I've done iodine tests. I keep iodophor on hand, and so years and years ago, I got really interested to do every 5 minutes during the mash, I'd pull a sample and test it. And in line with Kai Troister's findings, the good majority of, and I did this over a series of different brew days. The good majority of the batches that I was making, regardless of what the mash temp was, were fully converted. I put that in air quotes. It was fully converted within 15 to 20 minutes of starting the mash rest. So do beta amylase and alpha amylase react differently at different temperatures or whatnot? Yeah, maybe they do. But ultimately, I'm with you, Malcolm. If what you're doing works out, then just keep doing it. If you're getting a perceptibly drier beer by mashing for 4 days, then mash for 4 days. If that's what you want. So
you mentioned Kai Troister, which is the braukaiser.com.
Yeah.
Go look at his studies on mash pH and mash performance and fermentability, and it's diminishing returns. So the longer you go, you start eking out less and less and less. So that becomes economics of time and performance, and that can only be answered by you.
Yep. And it's preference based,
Exactly.
Ultimately so. Well, we appreciate the feedback, Kevin. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com. Leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320. You can drop something on social media. We may pick it up from there as well. All right, Malcolm, strawberry is often talked about as a fruit that's sort of difficult to use in beer, only because it apparently requires a lot to impart any flavor. At least that's what I've read. I've never personally brewed with strawberries myself. Well, listener Frank Osborne sent me a Berliner Weiss that he made with strawberries and sought some feedback.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Ooh, look how light that is. It's almost fluorescent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you keep sniffing it like you know what you're doing.
Smells
I know what it
citrusy.
is. I know what it is. I've had this before. It's beer.
Damn it. You got it.
Is it a sour?
It is sour.
Yeah.
It's trying to be.
It's a light sour. It's a sour. It's a light sour.
I like it.
Yeah, it's real good.
A little more sour would be good.
It's a light sour, and there's not a bunch of other flavors going on. It's just sour.
Kind of apple.
Actually, I like it better this way because it'd be easier to drink like a normal beer. Like when I drink ciders, I have to, or not ciders, sorry, that was a Freudian.
You have to like sip it and let it.
When I drink sours, I have to sip it. This you could drink like a normal beer. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's delicious. Oh, dude, I like that a lot.
Kind of like apple.
Oh, shut up.
No?
You're ruining it.
Come on. I'm trying.
Yeah, there might be some apple. You're just in my brain now. That's all. No, that's delicious, dude. It's a light cider or light. God, that's twice. It's a light sour.
It's a cider sour.
I think it's a sour. It might not be a sour.
Yeah,
it might just have soured them when they sent it over. Is that how that works? You know, the lactic acidosis on the plate over. Yeah, it's delicious. No, I could drink that. Yeah. I could drink that a lot.
I'll go with a 8 on the Jersey Tim.
Oh.
It's good. Very
I'll
drinkable.
give it a 7 just because you like sours more.
So that's a total of 17.
75, I think.
Honestly, the beer was quite nice, and while knowing that it was made, what it was made with likely influenced my perceptions, I did get, I kind of got a hint of strawberry in there, though it was not overpowering. It was sort of what I expected based on what I'd read about strawberry beers. I thought it was pretty cool how the guys picked up on a light sour. I mean, is there a better way to describe Berliner Weiss?
Well, it depends on what you read and who you believe. So a lot of older Berliner Weisses, if you look at some of the sensory on it, looked like they may have been bracingly sour. Hence the use of Mitschuss, those syrups, like Himbeer, which is raspberry, or Woodruff. So anyways, they were added to add sweetness because they were so intensely, bracingly, almost offensively sour.
Yeah.
But I do agree that a lot of modern Berliners are just lightly tart.
Yeah, that's most of the Berliner Weisses that I taste these days aren't abrasive. They tend to be pretty balanced. Frank's example was definitely balanced. It was really good. I didn't pick up the strawberry as strongly as you might if you use peaches or something like that. You tend to get a much stronger or noticeable fruit character.
Yeah, strawberry to me is one of those things where at low levels, if you can get it to come through, can be nice. But once you have to start really cramming the fruit in there, like in insane amounts of strawberry, it can take on this almost acetaldehyde-like character, and it smells like a chemical bug spray to me.
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's like a sweet spot, and I can't say I've mastered that at all.
Yeah. No, I very rarely, if ever, brew with fruit unless I'm making hard cider. But I will say that with strawberry, a lot of people lately have been using like fruit extracts, which are really just the compounds that make that fruit taste or smell the way it does. Strawberry is one of them. That artificial strawberry flavor is so offensive to me. It's and I wonder like I've heard people say that if you get freeze dried strawberries, you can use that in beer and you don't have to use as much because the flavors are concentrated. Yeah. I'd be concerned about maybe imparting some of that more artificial strawberry character.
I don't know. I'd be willing to try it. I'd probably be tempted to cook down some strawberries or even use like jam.
Oh yeah, jam. That's basically the same idea, right? You're getting that kind of condensed. Well, the beer I thought was pretty delicious, even if it wasn't terribly strawberry forward. Thanks a ton for sending that in, Frank. If you want your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, marshall@brulosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. Okie doke. We'll be back in just a bit. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brulosophy sent you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew-in-a-bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
Beer's been around for a long time, and it's safe to say the earliest versions weren't the super clean lagers and ales that we're used to today, but rather had some sour character to them.
So if you go look at sour beers and you ask people about sour beers, that you immediately will jump over to like Belgian tradition,
right?
Especially with the use of cool ships, open air fermenters, allowing a menagerie of microbes coming in from the air, and it's inherent to the environment of that area. So those microbes come in and inoculate your wort, and then the resultant beer is due to the characters of that microbiome, if you want to call it that, the microflora, I should say more accurately. Yeah. So you might have some wild yeast in the air, so that's great. You may have some Brettanomyces and Pediococcus and maybe even some Lactobacillus, and it can be argued if it's coming in on the air, like on dest moats or whatever, or if it's resident in the barrels that the beer eventually ends up in. Sure. I'm not sure if it matters as long as it gets in there and the process is always the same.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the beauty of it is, they did this thing, and that thing, these procedures begot this beer, so they kept doing that thing.
Yeah, and which is a fascinating thing for me to think about when it comes to sour beer, because, and I think even today there's an element of unpredictableness and kind of
PFM, to say it, PFM, pure fucking magic.
Pure fucking magic. Yeah. There's an element of that is still very much alive and I think even in commercial sour beer brewing. I've never been to Cantillon. I'd love to go someday, but everybody I know who's gone there is very well aware of the tradition of like not cleaning up the spider webs and stuff that are above their cool ships, and there's just kind of this mystical I guess PFM air about how these classic sour beers are produced, and how you can really only get that character because of the environment within which these beers are made.
Yeah, and we really haven't started studying a lot of these reactions and these precursors, secondary metabolites, and how all these microbes work in concert or in isolation until recently. And a lot of the work has been done by such groups as Milk the Funk, and you can listen to their podcast or go to their wiki page for sure, or join the Facebook group. Chad Jacobson, you got some notoriety for the Brettanomyces project, and now with the popularity of various sour beer breweries here in the U.S., it's shedding light on it, and now in our more information sharing age, people are doing things like isolating compounds in gas chromatograph, mass spectrometry, high pressure liquid chromatography. These scientific methods are being used to track what begets what in certain environments, in certain situations, and it's really interesting. I mean, we're at the forefront of the sour beer enlightenment age, and it's really
for
awesome.
As much as we know about making beer in general, it does feel like even though it's 2019 and sour beer has become pretty popular and it's being well made these days, right? People are enjoying these styles of beer. What we have to learn about it and controlling the process a little bit more, it makes me kind of curious whether or not the attempt to kind of rein in the randomness that is, or that we kind of know produces these classic sour beers. It's really curious to me to see what we're going to make of that? Is it going to be possible? I mean, we already do it a little bit with kettle souring, I guess. You're basically using a single lactobacillus or something like that to sour that wort, and then you're fermenting it with an ale yeast that is going to work well with that, and you can kind of produce these predictable products. But we are definitely on the cusp of something new. Of course, all of the scientific discoveries that came well before us is what has allowed us to produce clean beers predictably. It's understanding that there's multiple things at play, which is really the point of this episode. You've got Saccharomyces yeast or brewer's yeast, you've got Brettanomyces yeast, and then you've got a whole host of bacteria that all come into play when you're making these these sour beers with character.
And potentially wild yeast too. So wild yeast have a lot of characteristics that are unique, such as they may not attenuate fully or at all, but they may produce other metabolites and precursors.
Yeah.
And sometimes desirable and sometimes not. A lot of sour beer brewers have experimented with open air capture, and that's a good segue to talk about bootleg biology and their project, the yeast harvesting, which is now just a full-fledged lab. But but how these things work and how they work in concert, it was what was most curious to me, because like we said, with Cantillon and the other breweries over there, Cantillon gets most of the mention, but essentially they were just, like I said, doing a thing. They opened up the windows and had these cool ships, and this large surface area allowed the wort to cool at an acceptable rate, at a rate that begot good results. And it just was, hey, if we do it, and we do it 3 times a year, we get good, sour beers. And if we do it when it's too warm out, we get bad sour beer. So let's just only do it when it's cold out, or in the spring.
And I feel like they probably weren't even, I mean, I don't know. I think about these things in terms of that, like the evolution of discovery. I have to imagine first off, a cool ship is just a shallow pan that you rack all this wort into, so you don't have as much depth, and it takes less time for the wort to chill, essentially.
Yeah, but not too fast. They found that they like a certain cooling rate, because if you have poor geometry in a cool ship, now you're cooling too fast, and it changes the behavior of which microorganisms are growing at which rate.
Right. Well, but I guess what I was getting to is this concept in my mind is that they weren't necessarily out to invent or create sour beer, as it were. They were just making beer using these techniques, and it happened to end up having these, what we refer to as sour characteristics, lower pH or higher acidity at least, with these kind of funky flavors that were really desirable or became desirable over time. That's just a fun thing to think about.
Yeah, and it's the first version of science, observational science. I did this and I got that. Yeah. Well, let's change this one thing. Don't like that. Okay, stop doing that thing.
Stop dipping your dirty hand into the warm wort.
It seems like a simple way to get there. It's like watching a couple weeks ago in the news, these monkeys escaped from a zoo because they built a ladder. It's kind of like early people making beer. It's like, hey,
it's just a rad thing that we've got, again, that we've come to this point in time where we at least understand it enough to be able to reproduce what it is that we enjoy, despite the fact still having so much to learn about it. Well, the first time I made a sour beer, I think at this point it was between 5.5 and 6 years ago. I'd tasted a Flemish Red, a very popular Flemish Red ale that you used to be able to get pretty simply at the market, and I loved it. It was absolutely delicious, and I wanted to kind of make one of my own, and so I did a 10-gallon batch of a Flemish Red Ale recipe that I found online. I think it was from Michael Tonsmeyer's The Mad Fermentationist blog. And then I split it between 2 carboys. Of course I did glass because I was terrified of any oxygen coming in and ruining it. But back then what I did is I pitched a single pack of a sour ale blend of stuff. And it was Rosalaire, the Y-yeast Rosalaire. Pitch that into there in what we would refer to as a combined pitch. So it had all the bugs, it had all of the yeast that we were going to, use for that beer, and then nothing else was going to touch it. Into the other one, I forget exactly what the blend was, but it was a White Labs vial, 556 maybe or something like that, but I pitched that. And then after about 6 months, I started adding in the dregs of sour beers that I was enjoying. So it got hit with some stuff from the brewery, with some stuff from the Russian River, in what I guess we would term a version of this staggered pitch. And both of those have some pros and cons kind of associated with them.
Yeah, I like the staggered pitch, and drink some good beer, because it's an excuse to drink some good beer. And you talked about Michael Tonsmeyer earlier, the mad fermentationist, and I think he wrote in his book, or might have been on his blog, I don't recall at this point, but you're adding microorganisms that come with a resume. So you know what those beget, and you're kind of like, I like that, so you pour it in. So I would venture to guess, and I think most people would, that doing that versus doing them all at the same time up front would get a different product. And it may be better, it may be worse, who knows, it's a preference thing, but it should be different by observational, not by observational, but if you just think about what's happening in the eating of the sugars and the exposure to oxygen and the rate at which these microbes, be it bacteria or wild yeast, et cetera, are introduced, they have different things to act upon.
Right.
So it's almost like Brettanomyces, right? If you feed it different precursors, it will shoot out different things, supposedly. Just like dry hopping, and we heard about biotransformation, right? In the presence of these chemicals, you get those chemicals.
Right.
So you would venture to guess that if you have different things at the beginning, maybe more of one thing or less of another, be it oxygen, nutrients, fatty acids, et cetera, that the resultant beverage would be different.
Yeah. It makes sense to me as well. And I remember when I was making these, I hadn't even considered at the time the concept of staggered pitching. In fact, for that second batch, the one that didn't get hit with the Rosalaire, the only reason I started adding dregs is because I was drinking these sour beers with friends who knew I had these 2 sour beers sitting in my spare bathroom. And they started recommending doing it and telling me about some of the stuff they'd heard about, adding. Basically, what I was told was that by adding the dregs of these sour beers or any other, you can add whatever other bacterial blend that you want later on, that it will hasten the souring process. You'll actually produce a higher acidity quicker, and that the beer that I'm referring to that I started adding these dregs to just wasn't souring up very quickly, at least as quickly as I would have preferred. So that's why I did that. One of the things that I heard about combined pitching, and I guess this was sort of a concern expressed, or at least that's how I interpreted it, was that when you are pitching Saccharomyces, Brettanomyces, and then whatever blend of bugs, whatever blend of bacteria, Lactobacillus, Pediococcus, that there's some concern about one of those, usually I think it's Saccharomyces, kind of out-competing the other microbes that are in that blend. And so you're going to get the most character from the Saccharomyces as opposed to, say, the Brettanomyces or the bugs that you pitch with it?
Well, the funny enough is that Richard Priest up in, I think it's Ontario, so they did some experiments with that, and it was kind of counterintuitive. So, yes, you would think, Sac first would get something different than Sac and Brett at the same time. And I don't want to do any spoilers at this point, but I will say what they did find somewhat definitively was Brett by itself first produced more esters. So, yeah, so, if you want to coax out those pineapple tropical fruit, it's usually attributed to like Brett C. So if you want to coax those out, maybe do a starter first or add some Brett by itself and then do the rest of your pitching. And it just goes to show that the order can make a difference, but it might not be the order that you're willing. The common one is Sac, then other stuff, or
right.
all the stuff. You could also do in layers. Like you could kettle sour first, and then add Sac to get attenuation. Because if you do kettle souring, that's usually with lactic acid bacteria.
Yeah,
and you don't get a lot of attenuation. So, one of the theories is that perhaps Brett is more expressive when it's doing the bulk of the heavy lifting early because of the sugars that are available to it. But it could also be I guess theoretically it could also be metabolites that aren't in, the precursors from sac aren't there, such as maybe low oxygen. So
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Brett in the presence of oxygen creates some acetic acid. So maybe that's changing, the fact that the sac has eaten the oxygen. Maybe
Right.
that changes it a little bit,
Yeah. This is what I mean, man. There's so much, there's a trove of stuff we just don't know that much about, but it opens up the world for experimentation when it comes to making these. I mean, I'd be interested. I don't brew with Brett very often. It's not that I don't like it. I'm not a big enough fan to want to have 5 or 10 gallons of it sitting in my keezer. But I'd be really interested to see, if you pre-pitched, for example, with Brettanomyces, whatever of the variants that you prefer, but only let it go for like 2 days, right? So it's not, you haven't fully attenuated the beer, but then you toss in something like an Ardennes yeast, or, like a Belgian strain, sac strain, and ferment it. But then you swapped both of those for the other batch. Same timing. So pretty much you're getting the same level of attenuation, but then seeing what that other yeast does, after the initial fermentation. I think I'd be fascinated by that.
Well, I plan on doing more of these. And I've actually did reach out to Richard of Escarpment Labs. And being that he is a lab guy, he was saying like, hey, why don't you reach out to us and we can help you with the experiment to make it more, scientifically rigorous.
Yeah.
This experiment was shared on Milk to Funk like almost a year ago. And, I got some critiques, which is fine. And I actually welcome them. But at the same time, they're projecting what they want the experiment to be.
Sure.
They're saying
that
hey,
would never happen, Malcolm.
Yeah, you should have done this. You should have done that.
Yeah.
And I agree in some regards. I'm like, yeah, I should have done this or should have done that if I wanted the experiment to have these results, or if I was looking for that.
Yeah.
But the big discussion was that this could be more scientifically rigorous, and that also interests me. So I do plan on reaching out to Richard and others who expressed some feedback, and I would like to try that just because, why not? It's just a different take on how we do experiments. But I also like the fact that if I were to do a staggered pitch versus a co-pitch, I did it the way I would do it.
Tell us a little bit more about the way you do it, because this is something you've got much more experience with than I do as somebody who doesn't make sour beer very often. You have kind of an approach for co-pitching, which is pretty easy, as well as for staggered pitching.
Yeah, so really I'm kind of all over the place because I'm always experimenting. But I would say the basic procedure would be pick a yeast that I have or that I enjoy. And I usually use the Le Chouffe. So I use that as a Belgian yeast for doing the bulk of my heavy lifting for attenuation. And then I have lots of carboys and or barrels full of cultures. And I just write on my carboys what's in there. So I might have like this, literally a cutout of the Y yeast bag for Roselaire, and I put it over there, and that's kind of like my donor culture for Roselaire. And then I have like melange, but I might have it labeled as this carboy has melange plus loon dregs, for Cantillon, loon dregs, Loon. Another carboy might be Brett Brooks, and so it's just Brett Brooks, and it's really almost offensively, barnyard and hay, and I use those as like for blending when I'm trying to bring a beer into how I want it to be. But I also use them to create cultures. So before I go do a sour beer, I might make a very basic 70% Belgian pills and 30% unmalted wheat, do a simple mash regimen, rely on the malted wheat to provide some long chain sugars because I'm not going to do a cereal mash or a turban mash. I'm just kind of do a simple mash regimen, and then add my sack, and then I'll bring a racking cane and I'll just take a little bit of the bottoms from each of these cultures that I have, and let it go. And it's worked for me in the past.
Are you typically, if you were to go and make a sour beer right now, would you do combined or staggered, or prior to the experiment at the very least, what was your kind of go-to approach?
I typically did combined. It's easier. It's just lazy. It's just easier. Just add the yeast, add the bugs, and kind of, let it go.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is my again, I've only made a few of these types of beers, but my thing is, well, is the add, even though it's not that much more difficult to come back later and add bugs or whatever, is the payoff, is the difference preferable enough for me to actually want to do that, or why not just toss everything in the beginning? I tend to have a preference a bit for the more simple in life, as my wife will tell you. But yeah, I think it's interesting. And while some have adopted staggered pitching as the best way to produce sour beers, others have held on to tradition and co-pitch their yeast and their bugs. Curious whether it made a difference? You put it to the test, Malcolm, and we're going to get to those results right after this break. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brewlosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brewlosophy. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. My interest in sour beer is relatively young. I brewed my first one only 6 years ago or so, and even then I heard some murmuring about how pitching Saccharomyces first, then tossing in Brett and bugs later on, would produce a better product.
Well, and I was kind of the opposite. I was always a co-pitcher first, but I was intrigued by the staggered version, especially because people were doing it, so I wanted to see if it mattered.
Yeah.
And I knew a lot of people who did it for the purpose of keeping clean equipment. So it had some professional applicability, people who might ferment in a conical and then move stuff to a barrel.
Sure.
So I thought I'd play around with that too, as far as if it still made good beer, and but yeah, typically I have a few base beers, like for a golden, a red, and a brown, and I just do co-pitch. And I would tell anyone who wants to experiment with sour beer just to make like a 60 or 70% Pilsner and 20, whatever the math works out to, 40 or 30% wheat, and then add Roselaire. Don't even hop it if you don't want. You can do like 5 IBUs if you feel
now
crazy.
My experience with doing basically that was that these bug yeast blends, Roselaire, Sour Patch Kids, the few that White Labs has, that they tend to take a little bit longer, and I think that's why I've been wont to do more of the wort souring. So I'll pre-sour the wort quickly with a lab, a lactic acid bacteria, and then I'll just boil that real quick or bring it up to pasteurization temp and then just pitch yeast and let her go. And you're turning them around in the regular amount of time that you do standard ale and lager. But for these ones, to me, that takes a little bit longer. I still think there's something kind of romantic about trying it out, though, and having a carboy sitting in your dark closet for a year.
Yeah, I like the idea of it. I like tasting it along the way and having friends over, and you just, pull a half liter of it and try it, and at some point you might just go, wow, this is delicious. I should carb this up.
Yeah, right.
And some of them actually taste good still, and some of them taste good, somewhat at room temperature. Because to me, they're almost like they're closer to a wine.
They're a little more, and I think a part of it for me is the mindset of I know this is old. There's only so much of it, and it kind of influences the way I perceive the beer. Well, for this experiment, you wanted to compare beers made, basically the same beer made, one being co-pitched with everything at the beginning, and then the other one being staggered. Yeah,
so I laughingly made a simple golden ale recipe: 60% Pilsner, 25% wheat, 7% spelt, 5% golden naked oak.
So
to keep it extra simple, I added a little bit of simple Munich Light. I don't know why I did that, but I think I was just in a mood. But anyways, that's a golden sour recipe. You could actually cut out the spelt, the golden naked oats, and the Munich, and make up the difference. Just make it 60-40 wheat.
Sure.
But that's what I did. I mashed at 154 for only 45 minutes, and the idea there was to not fully convert, but as we've talked about before, probably everything was converted.
Yeah, that's 68C for our international friends there.
Yes, thank you. So I have 7% spelt and golden naked oats there. I was hoping to bring over some complex carbohydrates for the bugs to chew on, and I used a little bit of EKG at 15 minutes in the boil. Not really needed. Try to keep it under 5 IBU for most sour beers, especially because lactic acid bacteria, most of them are inhibited by bitterness or alpha acids.
Yeah.
So and I also did a small dry hop just for some aroma, even though after aging it for several months, it's not even sure if that mattered. Boiled for 60 minutes and chilled. So my OG on this beer was 1052, I believe. Whatever that is for Plato, I should know that by now. Split the wort between 2 identical fermenters. So for this batch, it was a 10-gallon batch, and I split into fermenters because the variable was in the fermenters. I used Saccharomyces in one batch. I used Y yeast 3522, so Belgian Ardennes, for both. So they both got a starter of that, and then the other one got Saccharomyces and a menagerie of bacteria. And I if you go to the experiment, you'll see that I used melange and loon dregs, I believe. And there might have been something else that was taped to my carboy. Because what I did is I took some donor bacteria from my slurries, and I grew it up for like a week and a half, 2 weeks, so that they were I had enough biomass for the 2. And one fermenter got just the sac on day 1, and the other fermenter got sac and the menagerie of bacteria, which
half of what you had built up, right?
Yeah, half. I stirred it up.
So they came from the same. Yeah.
And I tried to make sure that I had plenty of time, such that even though batch 1, the staggered pitch batch, only got sac, and then 2 weeks later it got the bacteria, I didn't want the Brettanomyces and the PDO and the lacto, whatever else is in there, to continue to grow. But I guess that is another variable, right? Because that batch did get the bugs 2 weeks later. And someone mentioned that on Milk Defunct, like that starter could have changed in 2 weeks. And that's
Naturally,
fair.
yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But they would have changed if they had just left them in my carboy too. So
Exactly.
But that's fine. After 2 weeks, the same amount of bacteria, as best as I could, was added to the staggered batch. So at this point, I think I had I let it go for 4 weeks, and then I had a pH of 3.9 in the combined and 3.7 pH in the staggered batch, which was surprising. I would have thought that the one that was working longer would have had a lower pH.
Me too. And this to me was sort of confirmation of my experience that I just talked about of pitching combined and having these beers take forever, to really develop that acid character that I'm after when, in sour beer. The fact that adding and it kind of, again, confirms what I had been told by people. I started off doing combined pitching, but I started hearing later on that staggered works better. And this seems to kind of confirm that the acid being added after the fact, that's not certainty, but did produce a fairly big difference in pH after just 6 weeks.
Yeah, if you consider pH as a log scale, yeah, it's pretty, 2.5 difference. One of the theories was that perhaps when I was opening up the carboy to pitch, that I added more oxygen, and that allowed Brett to help the lactic acid bacteria. So the lactic acid bacteria is obviously making lactic acid,
right.
But Brett, in the presence of oxygen, can create acetic acid.
Right.
So that's a theory. That seems like an aggressive amount of acid ions, but I don't fully know.
Yeah. Well, you let them sit for another 2 full weeks, so 8 weeks in total before you took hydrometer measurements for FG, as well as another set of pH measurements, which I think is even more interesting. Hydrometer measurements showed 10.05 for the combined or the co-pitch batch compared to 10.03 for the staggered. So a small difference in attenuation. I don't think that's anything that couldn't be accounted for by just standard variation, but maybe,
Yeah. But interesting, the one with the lower pH was also the one with the lower gravity.
Yeah. So the pH differences here, again, 2 more weeks, and you dropped from the co-pitch batch from 3.95 down to 3.86. Not huge, but the one that was at 3.7, the staggered pitch before, was now at 3.6. Still a decent difference between the two batches at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, I can't explain it. Just could be the result of the variable.
Yeah.
Both beers were racked to kegs. I push out of my kegs with CO2. Actually, in this case, this was buckets, so I'm pretty sure I just racked them over. But I racked them over to a keg that was purged with gas, and then allowed them to condition for a couple weeks before being served. These beers look identical, and they were gorgeous, by the way. You should go to the experiment and look at them.
I'm looking at the picture right now and just want to crush both of those glasses of beer.
Yeah.
They look so good. I have to believe that your use of the not so simple Munich malt in this did add a touch of that orangey color.
That was probably the killer.
Yeah, which I think is just beautiful. But perfect head, nice white cap of foam. For all intents and purposes, these beers looked identical. I guess what really matters is whether they tasted different or not. Malcolm, how did you do? Before we get to the experiment results, because we've actually got 3 sets to report. I think this is really interesting. When you were tasting these, what were your thoughts? How was your ability on blind triangle tests?
On the early version of the experiment, I served these beers at Dancing Gnome, and I remember one of them being offensive. It almost smelled like burnt hair. And I believe that was the staggered pitch one.
Okay.
And oddly, some people liked that one. So, there's preference for you. I did quite well on the first version of the blind triangle, to myself. So obviously biased and cited. But I was 3 for 3.
And this was fairly soon after kegging. I think it was within a month or so after you kegged these beers. So you were able to tell a difference pretty easily. It sounds like you actually had some pretty strong opinions about the flavor as well. Do you recall what the co-pitched version tasted like?
Like sweet tarts, actually.
So it was what you expected, is in essence.
Yeah, it was pretty aggressively tart, even though the pH doesn't seem like that's the case at 3.9 or 3.86, but it tasted like Smarties, in a nice, pleasant way, fruity and tart. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, because of the fact that these are sour beers and sour beers are kind of known for being aged, we did collect 2 sets of data separated by 10 months, which is badass, man. I mean, that takes some commitment to not go and tap into those kegs.
I was tapping into them. Come on.
But not, you didn't take it all. The original plan was to let these age for 10 months, collect the data then, but you had the idea to go and collect an initial set just a few weeks after kegging them up, which I thought was awesome. So from that one, you went to Dancing Gnome, you said, and you were able to collect data from 15 participants, which would require 9 of them. That's a pretty good chunk. 9 of them to accurately identify the unique sample in the triangle in order for us to say it was significant. And in the end, 10 people got it right. So 67% were able to say, of those participants were able to say that they could identify this beer, which is pretty telling. I mean, that says that these beers were probably, noticeably different. And then just out of interest, we asked them for preferences because they did get it right after all. 5 of them, like you, preferred the co-pitched beer. Only 1 liked the staggered pitched beer, which I think is pretty telling. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah, I thought it would have been more, I thought it would have been more powerful result. Because like I said, to me, they smelled pretty different. And I was almost upset at myself. And I didn't like the way one of the beers tasted. So I was almost, didn't want to serve them, because I'm thinking like...
I don't have that problem.
Some of these people are under the impression that I'm a good brewer.
You don't want to lose your rep.
Luckily, some of my friends in there who no matter what I do think I'm a horrible brewer. So
they have to, yeah. So also people, if you're confused about the fact that we only reported 6 for the preference when 10 people got it right, 4 people said that they didn't have a preference despite noticing a difference between the beers. So anyways, you let 10 months go by and you collect another set of data, and this to me is quite fascinating. You want to tell us a little bit about this data set?
Yeah, so 10 months later, I served the beers again at the bottom of the basement in Penn Brewing here in Pittsburgh. They've always been friendly to our brew clubs. And at this point, the beers had converged, in my opinion. So I was impressed by the fact that they started to taste more similar, but they were not identical yet. But I do believe part of that to me was because I had tasted them along their journey.
Sure.
I had been drinking them over the 10 months, so I kind of knew what to look for.
Yeah.
This time, 21 people were in attendance that participated, and at that number of participants, I would have needed 12 to be significant, and I got 15. That's
15 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 71%, not terribly different than the 67% before. 71% of people were able to distinguish these beers after an additional 10 months. And so the part that gets me is this. In terms of preference, only 3 of those 15 people liked the co-pitched one better. 11 preferred the staggered pitched beer.
Yeah, that was surprising to me because it was like the opposite of what happened last time.
Exactly.
At the first time, I thought more people would have got it. And this time, I was surprised as many people got it. And maybe they were sensitive. Maybe there's something that was in the beers that I'm not as sensitive to.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking I didn't prefer the staggered because I still thought it had like that burnt hair hay, but It was probably real small. It was super, super small, and that's usually 4-ethyl phenol. In small amounts, it can be that horse blanket, even mousy or barnyard, but in high amounts, it can get to smoky and burny.
Sure.
So, I hate to be like, well, maybe I'm sensitive to that, but maybe I am, or maybe I was looking for it because I knew it was there before.
Exactly, yeah.
But the funny thing is 11 people preferred it. And all I told them about this beer was one of them's different.
Yeah.
But they all started drinking it and their eyes lit up. They're like, we're doing a sour beer experiment. This is great. And some people specifically noted that they liked that funky barnyard character that I thought was perhaps too high.
Yeah.
But they liked it in what they were considering it to be a wild ale.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting. And again, just to be totally transparent, one person said they had no preference despite noticing a difference. But 11 out of 15 people. We often say that preference is totally subjective, but when you start to get that high, it does start to make me wonder, man, is there something shared in what we prefer? That's pretty interesting finding there. Just for those out there who are wondering, we did combine this data. That's not terribly great science, but I do think it's interesting. So altogether, that makes for 36 participants, out of which 18 would have had to identify the odd beer out in order for us to reach significance, and 25 did. So even when you combine it, it does still maintain that level of significance. 69% of people able to accurately identify the unique sample. I'm curious, Malcolm, before we get into some reader comments, what, if any, implications did you glean from this experience?
That my previous method was good enough and perhaps even better to my perceptions and to my proclivities.
Yeah.
So I think doing the staggered has the ability to allow you to steer beer. You can add microbes at different points and potentially get a different result. And harping on the fact that this is one data set and it wasn't a perfectly designed experiment per feedback, and I accept that. But it does appear that the beers are different somehow. Yeah. Perceptibly so, and quite strongly at that.
That was a long way of saying "I told you so," Malcolm.
It's implied, man. No, I really do think that if you like the other method, then that's the right answer for you. So
exactly,
if it works for you because of equipment or other constraints, if it works for you because you like the result, 11 people preferred the staggered. So. If I were a salesman,
yeah, no joke. Yeah, that's the way to look at it. So, for me, again, I don't see myself making very many sour beers moving forward, only because I really do like the character that I get from these quick turnaround, kettle sour beers that I make. But I, and actually, when you think about that, it is sort of a staggered approach. It's just different. There are some things that are different about it. But in my mind, I didn't get to taste these beers, but I'm looking and kind of trusting you, and I know that you and I have somewhat similar tastes. I think I'd probably stick with co-pitching because it's simpler and did produce a tasty beer. Yeah,
and one of the things I found interesting is that I have some notes from the tasting back at Penn. Was one of the things I was detecting on the combined was this. It was fruitier to me and sweeter, and I think the other people, well, I know because I wrote it down, they said they liked the fact that the other one was more complex. So maybe that barnyard thing to them was complexity.
Sure,
right?
Sure, makes sense to me.
I do like so I use that melange strain precisely because it begets this tropical fruit and orange character, and then I use it to blend to make goose a lot.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So. I think you could do both and then blend to steer the beer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got some reader comments we should get to here real quick. Jay in Montana commented, "Man, this one really blows my mind. Sours to me really emphasize one thing. They are literally alive. They change with time and with the tiniest of variables. Love it. Great experiment."
Yeah, they are alive. You can harvest, and it has been done. Brettanomyces especially seems to have the ability to hang on, and it'll actually metabolize other Brettanomyces or sac. So when autolysis starts to set in, that could be actually beneficial to some flavor compounds for Brettanomyces. So it's like they turn into vultures, if you will. Obviously sac and Brett different species, but. It's kind of neat how, years later people have harvested Brett from bottles.
It's crazy.
There was a meeting talked about on the Milk the Funk podcast where people were bringing old Berliner Weiss like that hadn't been around in like 20 years.
It's crazy.
I might be exaggerating the time, but I think it was the 70s, 80s or whatever. At the very least, the early 90s, people were bringing, these bottles, and they were harvesting Brett strains from it. That's
that were still alive and able to be used. Yeah, I remember reading about that. Just nuts.
Yeah. So that's pretty awesome to me.
Yeah. No, I agree. We've got another comment from R. Renaud on Reddit. He says, "Awesome. I'm going to have to change my process for my sour cellar project to staggered pitch. I've noticed my sours often lack the funky Brett character of a lot of good commercial sours. Perhaps I'll go 80% staggered, 20% co-pitched." Maybe I don't know if what he's saying there, if he's going to make 2 batches and then blend an 80% staggered with a 20% co-pitched, but
yeah, it sounds like a good method though, right? Because it gives you the ability to tabletop blend and then make the beer that you want. Just for a point of reference, there was another experiment which was talked about on the Milk the Funk podcast. I think it's episode 000, in which they fermented Brett at different temperatures, and as would be expected, the higher temperatures had more esters, right? So you could ferment one at lower temperature and you get more of the phenols. Mm-hmm. And it's not that you get more, it's just that you get less esters. So in the same beer, it stands out more.
Sure.
So, yeah, you can actually measure these, as far as how many micrograms per liter. And you say, hey, the esters are lower and the phenols are about the same. So phenols stand out. So you could ferment one cool, one warm, and then blend to get your preferred balance.
Yeah, no, there you go. I think that's cool area for exploration for anybody into that style of beer for sure. T-Lens on Reddit says, timely again. I just pitched Bootleg's Mad Fermentationist blend last night. I'm running this on a pretty tight timeline by planning to serve it at the beginning of July. And while I'd love to take some comfort from the preference data, I know it's not actually applicable to my beer. I do like how people are viewing this and the 2 data sets, right? The 2 sets of results from the different timings and kind of applying it to their own brewing.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole point, right? You just take, if you don't, the experiment doesn't directly, it's not applicable to you exactly. Take the parts that are, and apply them to your processes.
Yeah, it's just beer. It's fun. Have you used the Mad Fermentationist blend from Bootleg Biology?
I have. You know what? I haven't tasted the beer. I moved on to Atlanta. I have a Solera of it in a Senki.
Oh,
and
nice.
It's actually wrapped up in has, at this point, it's bunged out, and I just drove it up in my car up here to Cleveland because I'll be moving up here, and I should crack it open and taste it.
Yeah. I've not used it yet either. Just like, again, I don't make many of these types of beers, but I've heard great things about it. Tom Alexander on Facebook says, the staggered method is also easier. I find that I don't have to monitor the temperature fluctuations after inoculating my secondary. He secondaries in a keg, it sounds like, with bottle dregs. Most of the flavor comes through in the first 3 months.
There you go.
Yeah,
good method. I do something similar. I have regular beers that I'll make. For example, a low bittered ESB, so lower bitterness, and I finish it out, and then I add some Brett into the keg, and I kind of forget about it, and then in a few months, it's a special treat.
Yeah, it's sort of, that's basically, pretty common way for, like Orval, right? Don't they do bottled?
Keg Orval, yeah. Keg Vol.
Yeah, Keg Vol. All right, final comment comes from Dean Kelly on Facebook. He says, I've heard of this also being done to get super high ABV as well, like a Utopias clone. So that's Sam Adams' crazy big beer that they release annually. Not a big fan of sours, though. So I think Dean's asking about basically staggering pitch. That's something that's fairly well known, right? Is adding yeast additions as during fermentation or while you're moving along down that.
I think I'm guessing here, but I think what they're thinking about there is staggered pitching and staggered oxygenation, and then dosing of sugar.
Yeah.
As you climb up in ABV, and that's supposedly how various breweries get those beers into the 20s, and higher. So what you do is you have a beer when you're nearly through fermentation, you add more sugar, oxygenate again, and potentially add more yeast. So you're basically croisoning all along the process.
Yeah. Well, that's I'm actually not entirely certain we do have an experiment on that one yet, but I know that we've got something similar in the works. Of course, that's for another episode. That is all the time we've got for this episode. But Malcolm, first, you've got some news, man. Are you cool with sharing with us what you've been up to lately?
No. I've joined the team here at Fatheads in Cleveland. I'm very fortunate because they're awesome. They make great beer, and they have an immense amount of really smart people that I'm learning from.
Yeah, man. Super proud of you. Super excited for you. And I trust, I have not had Fatheads yet, but I trust that when I taste it, it's probably going to be at least a little bit better than it was prior to you joining the crew over there. But again, congratulations. It's super awesome news, man. Don't forget to head over to brulosophy.com to read about the experiment discussed in this episode, as well as all of the other stuff that we're up to. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.